Wow, baby, last night was incredible, and this morning, too. You've really outdone yourself. When was the last time we did that 3 times in 12 hours? I grinned. Since before the girls were born, maybes? Amy snuggled closer, and I wrapped my arms around her, the love of my life for over 20 years. I still miss the girls, she murmured, but this empty nest thing does have its perks. I couldn't help but smile as memories flashed through my mind. Dating Amy, marrying her, and then welcoming our daughters, who came just a year apart. I remembered how our family grew as the girls traded dolls for bikes, then for soccer cleats, boyfriends, driver's licenses, and eventually graduation caps. Suddenly, they were off to college, leaving Amy and me alone in a quiet house. I kissed the top of her head. The last 20 years went by in a blur, didn't they? But now, I think it's time we focus on us again, like we did before the girls came along. Amy giggled softly. We're not newlyweds anymore, but there's still plenty we can do to keep the fire alive. I felt utterly content as I stroked her hand, enjoying the warmth of her soft skin. She purred in appreciation, and just as I was drifting off, she lifted her head to kiss me on the lips. Tim, she whispered, making love to you is one of my greatest joys. I know you feel the same. Absolutely, I mumbled, half asleep but utterly honest. You make me so happy, Amy. I'm lucky to have you. Her voice softened. What we have is wonderful. I want us to always have this, to spoil our grandchildren someday and grow old together. She kissed me again, and I felt myself drifting deeper into sleep when her words took a turn. But before grandchildren and old age, I want a new adventure, she said. Her tone pulled me back from the brink of slumber. I opened one eye, raising an eyebrow. Adventure? She hesitated. I know it's selfish, she admitted, but I want to explore something new before we're too old. Alarm bells quietly rang in the back of my mind. I shook off my grogginess and sat up slightly. What kind of adventures? I asked. Amy gave me a hesitant smile. Well, it's more for me than for us. But I think you could have an adventure of your own too. That mental alarm grew louder. I sat up fully, bracing myself against the headboard and forcing her to pull back. My gaze locked on hers. Amy, stop being vague. Just tell me what you're talking about. She shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean to upset you, she said quickly. I'm not upset yet, I replied firmly. But go on. Amy took a deep breath. You know how Dan from work has been bragging about that sailboat he and his brother Rob bought last month? Well, Susan, my cubicle neighbor, went sailing with them last weekend. Amy mentioned how much Susan enjoyed her time on the sailboat and said she wanted to go again. I'd casually agreed it sounded fun, but apparently she told Dan because now he was inviting both of us to join them next weekend. I stared at my wife, a knot tightening in my stomach. So, some guy I've never met is inviting you away for the weekend? And it's Labor Day, so we're talking about a 3-day weekend. I struggled to keep my voice calm. Amy smiled lightly. I have pictures of the boat if you want to see. It's beautiful. And Susan said they had a great time sailing around the lake. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Amy, Susan is single. You're married. Don't you see how that's a problem? I know, baby, she said softly, reaching out to touch my face. I pulled away sharply. It's just one weekend, one last adventure, she whispered. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding. No way in hell. Forget it. I'm not letting you play the naughty student on a sailboat for a weekend of fun with your coworker. Her expression shifted. I didn't say anything about sleeping with him. Come on, Amy. What makes you think 2 guys would invite 2 women onto their boat for a weekend? Did Susan tell you what happened with them? Her eyes dropped to the bed. Yes, she admitted quietly.
She did. She had sex with them.
But that doesn't mean I would. I felt sick. So Susan had her adventure. And now you want yours? It's not about the boat, Amy, is it? This is about spending the weekend with 2 younger men. Her voice cracked as she rushed to explain. Tim, I'm sorry. I think I just got caught up in Susan's story. It sounded like such a grand adventure. I wasn't thinking. I'll tell them I'm not going. 20 minutes ago, I'd felt on top of the world, secure in my marriage, holding the woman I loved, confident in our commitment. Now, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy, believing she felt the same way. Amy began to cry, her words tumbling over themselves. I love you, Tim. I'll always love you. I'm so stupid, and I don't know what I was thinking. Please ignore everything I said. Please forgive me. Her voice faded behind me as I walked into the bathroom, closing and locking the door. Under the shower, I let the water wash away the physical remnants of our lovemaking, but my mind was still spinning from the shock of her suggestion. How could she even think I'd agree to such a betrayal? When I stepped out, Amy was lying face down on the bed, her sobs muffled in the pillow. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face breaking my heart all over again. I sat down on the bed, and Amy immediately sat up, pressing herself against me. I put my arms around her, stroking her back until her sobbing eased. Amy, I said quietly, for 22 years, you've made me believe in us, in our relationship. I thought we wanted the same things, that we shared the same values and desires. I never doubted you, not once, until today. Oh my God, Tim, I'm so sorry, she whispered. While you were in the shower, I thought about everything I said and what I had planned. I imagined how I would feel if you had come to me with the same idea. If you told me 2 women had invited you to go away for a weekend, I almost threw up. I can't believe how selfish I've been, like some immature teenager, not a wife and mother. I'm so ashamed of myself. Her voice cracked as she continued, I feel so stupid. I can't even imagine how I thought this would be okay. I've ruined everything. What do we do now? How do we move forward? How can you trust me when I was willing to betray you like this? What does that say about our future? Her tears returned, and I could see her battling with the weight of her actions. I guess I've taken you for granted, she admitted. You've always been so reliable, so steady. I think I let myself believe that your devotion meant I could indulge in this silly, selfish fantasy. But I was wrong, so wrong. I neglected you, disrespected you. I should have treasured your love, not taken it for granted. Please, Tim, tell me how I can make this right. I know I've hurt you, but I'll do anything to fix this. Please, just give me a chance. I sighed, my heart still heavy. I don't know, Amy. Our marriage is seriously damaged. Everything I believed about us feels shaken. You say you took me for granted, but is that my fault? Was I too loyal? Too predictable? Do you find me boring now? Her eyes widened in horror.
No.
Oh, God, no. This was all me, Tim. My selfish, childish indulgence. Maybe your devotion was so strong that I convinced myself it was okay to take it for granted. But that was so wrong. I should have honored and cherished it, not abused it. I know I failed you, but please, let me show you I've learned from this. Let me prove to you how much I love you. Please give me a chance to save our marriage. I didn't know if her plea convinced me, or if I was just desperate to believe she was still the woman I'd loved for 22 years, but I nodded. Amy threw her arms around me, sobbing and kissing me. Call Susan, I said firmly, and tell her to let Dan and Rob know you're not going. And Amy, promise me you'll stay away from Dan at work. Either you or Susan or both need to make it clear that this kind of invitation is completely inappropriate. You need to let everyone know you would never even consider something like this. Amy hesitated for a moment, then smiled through her tears. You know, she said softly, maybe I should think about working for your sister at her bakery. We don't need the extra money, and she could use the help. It would be a responsible, mature, unselfish thing to do. I nodded again, a small glimmer of hope breaking through the hurt. Epilogue. What Amy did stayed with me for a long time. The hurt from her actions didn't disappear overnight, but I couldn't bring myself to let 22 years of love and commitment be ruined by one selfish mistake, especially one she didn't follow through with. Over time, as Amy worked hard to rebuild my trust, the doubts slowly faded. She loved her time working at the bakery, eventually retiring to spend more time with our grandchildren. I still have a year or 2 left before I can retire, but Amy has already promised me one thing. When the time comes, she's ready for a new adventure, with me and no one else.